My parents were jazzers, so my dad, they were both doctors, in fact, sexologists, um, but they were both jazz pianists. And so I would have heard my dad playing piano and my mum playing piano. My dad had a pretty good jazz record collection, so he used to play Duke Ellington and Charles Mingus, John Coltrane, early John Coltrane, and Louis Armstrong, stuff like that. Occasionally, he had his friend Derek, who was a mathematician, who used to come around and play tenor saxophone. And when we used to live in Oxford from the age of 2 till 9, me being 2 till 9. So Derek used to come around, and there would be these sort of jam sessions. And so jazz was kind of always there in our family, and yeah, it was kind of just always on. I think I had piano lessons from a lady called Mrs. Bottom. That's just a factual statement. Um, and didn't particularly enjoy them, but apparently I expressed an interest in playing the drums from quite an early age, and I don't remember anything about why that happened. And my Auntie Pat, who was an administrator with English National Opera, showed up at one point with a snare drum and left it. I have no idea why. So I started playing around on that. And then when I was about 7, my dad said he wanted to take me somewhere, and he was being weird. I didn't know I'm a twin. You may or may not be interviewing my twin brother Phil, but we kind of generally did stuff together. So my dad, he just took me out in the car, and it's a bit weird, but I sort of remember him thinking, oh, I think he's going to kill me. And that's a really difficult thing to explain, because my dad wasn't a frightening or violent person, and I can't explain why I felt that, and I can't explain why I didn't. I sort of felt it as though, oh, okay, and I didn't sort of feel scared or try to do anything about it. It just had a sense of impending death. And then he took me to this second-hand shop called Serendipity, and we went in there, and there was a German army helmet on the wall. He said, "What can you see?" And I said, "Well, there's a German army helmet over there. Can you see anything else?" "Oh, there's a little drum kit over there. Do you want it?" "Yeah." And then he bought it for £20 and put it in the back of the car. We drove back to the house, and I was going, "Oh, okay. He's not killing me. He's buying." The whole thing was about the drum kit. Cool.
Why on earth did you think he was going to?
I have no idea. It's a good question. I have no idea. There was no reason for it, and it's kind of weird. Looking back on it, it's kind of odd. But it was because I never did stuff on my own with my dad. So I just thought, well, maybe they decided to keep the other one. And let's face it, he's definitely better. I used to play drums with my dad, and he used to play vibes and piano. So he would play rhythms on the vibes, and I would play it back to him, stuff like that. I don't remember getting drum lessons this is when we lived in Oxford, and I don't remember getting drum lessons there. The first drum lessons I can remember was when we moved to Scotland when I was 9. But it doesn't kind of make sense that I didn't have any drum lessons. But I started getting drum lessons from a guy in Wester Hells, funnily enough, which is where Tommy Smith's from. And he had this, I don't know how my dad found him, but he had this flat in a multi-storey building in Wester Hells, and we used to drive there, and you couldn't make any noise. So he had like tea towels over all his drums, and most lesson was spent with him writing rhythms out on in this little book, and he'd like put it in front of you to play that, and not too loud. So it wasn't the best drum lessons I've ever had, but kind of got me started. And yeah. And my brother started playing clarinet a bit after that. He was getting lessons at school. I remember playing drums at that school in Oxford as part of Thingy Bob and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat performance. Joseph, and we did that as a primary school musical, and I played drums with the music teacher or one of the teachers. So I must have been okay enough to do that, but yeah. When my brother and I really got kind of gripped by the jazz thing was when we were about 11. So we'd start playing music with my dad and improvising and things like that. But there was something about this book called Bird Lives by, can't remember his name, about Charlie Parker. And we both read it and got completely gripped by this sort of figure of Charlie Parker and the sort of bebop era and the whole... And as a result, because bebop was a sort of a bit of a radical shift from the jazz that came before it, initially we sort of looked down upon the earlier jazz, sort of Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, that kind of thing. But we got totally gripped by that. I started listening a lot to Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, Max Roach, that kind of thing. So, and then I think we started getting really interested in playing and practicing around that time, so 11, 12 years old. But we were still very isolated, and we were just playing with each other and my dad. And I say to my son, you know, and nowadays you can find everything you want on YouTube if you want to learn anything. But it was completely different then. You just sort of had to just work stuff out. But we had access to this really great record collection that my dad had. And the music at school was quite good. So we had this piano teacher who used to let us improvise in our piano lessons, which was kind of cool. And he was, oh, that's wonderful, marvelous. But we didn't really know what we were doing, but we sort of had a sense of this is what we do. And there was a certain point when we, about 14, went to a jazz school in the summer in England called Wavendon. It was set up by Johnny Danforth and Cleo Lane, although they didn't teach on it. So I got some drum lessons there for like first actual proper drum lessons. And we went to that, I think, 3 summers in a row. So I would get given loads of stuff to practice and take it away. And we kind of got totally, it was like, oh my God, you know, there's lots of great British jazz musicians teaching then. And actually a lot of people that went on to become professionals were there as kids or as young people. So people like Julian Arguelles and Dave O'Higgins and Nicky Isles, Ian Bellamy were all showed up at that during one of those 3 years. Although at that time we didn't know we were all going to become sort of contemporary professionals. But so it kind of sort of gradually came into focus. But and it didn't feel like it was an option as a kind of thing to go and study at that time. I think it's totally different now. There was a bit of jazz. There was a bit of a thing called Broughton Jazz School that was the first time I met Tommy Smith and John Ray, who are our contemporaries. And so we went, and that was put on by Roger Spence, and Platform, I think, was an organisation that was promoting jazz gigs. So we went along to that, and suddenly there were these other young jazz musicians of our age that we'd never met, and they became our sort of peer group. So it sort of just gradually came into focus, this sense of being part of a cohort of jazz musicians that were kind of and as it turned out, Edinburgh at that time produced a lot of really good young jazz musicians. So Kevin McKenzie, Colin Steele, Brian Kellogg, John Ray, Tommy Smith, me and my brother were all roughly the same age, of give or take a few years, and all sort of appeared around the same time. I think we'd all gone into jazz because of parents or things in our families. So none of us had done it at school or anything like that. And we didn't meet in a big band or anything like that. We just all kind of came out in the woodwork around the same time. I was playing with my brother, and we did a few gigs with my dad that were, my dad used to have these bass pedals that he played and the piano, and he grunts quite a lot when he's playing. And we had a huge, the main big fight I ever had with my dad as a teenager was about my drumming during his his solos during one of these gigs. He's like, "You were playing way too much in my solo," and I was going, "No, I wasn't." And the fact that you're, and it was like got really pissed off, and I was like, "No, fuck you, I wasn't. I was playing the best I could." And you take it, and then we had a huge fight. My mum was walking past, going, "Stick to your guns, stick to your guns." And it was the first time I really took him on and sort of confronted him. And ironically, it was about. And looking back on it, I almost certainly was playing way too much, you know. But he was being a dick, so that's official. Dad, you were being a dick. But we. At that time, Tommy and John Ray were playing together, and they were really good. And we were always sort of, so I think we had a sense that we had, me and my brother both had the sense that we were, we knew we were better than we were at the time. We sort of sensed we were going to get better, and we sort of took ourselves seriously. But we knew that we weren't as polished as guys like Tommy and John, who were really together very early on. But I don't remember. And then I used to go and sit in. Like Tommy and John had this gig, and we used to go and sit in and stuff like that, and go and sit in. Alex Shaw had a gig at the hotel in the Princess Street. So he was this older guy that was a very good piano player, played standards. In fact, with Gina's dad, Ronnie, that you can interview later, was on bass, and Dave Swanson was on drums. So I used to go and sit in regularly there, and he was always like, "All right, son, keep going, you're getting there." But one of the things of that time that I think was relevant was there wasn't really a lot of activity of people in their mid-20s or 30s in Scotland. There was virtually nothing happening. So at that jazz school we went when we were 16, the teachers were like Gordon Cruikshank, Bill Kyle, the two that I can remember. And, you know, Gordon was a really good player, but him and Alex Shaw were two guys that had tried to go to London when they were younger and hadn't coped with it, had serious drink problems, and ended up staying in Scotland. So it kind of they weren't playing original music, they weren't writing their own music. They were just they were playing standards. Bill Kyle did some original music and sort of fusion stuff like that. But it wasn't we didn't really respect it. It wasn't like, this is really amazing. And that may just be the way things are. So like the young guys that are coming up in Scotland now probably don't think what we do is amazing. So they're into somebody from New York and all that. But we didn't have, there wasn't people making records of original stuff, and you know, it wasn't anybody playing experimental jazz or free jazz that I can remember in Scotland. So it was quite a, you know, backwater at that time. And then around that time, Phil and I went to Cambridge University to study medicine. So we didn't really know what we wanted to do, and that was mainly because we got good exam results and our parents were doctors, and it was like, that's what you do, so may as well try that. And then the first day we got there, you know, there's that sort of cliched, the hall full of all the clubs like you get in the films, and it's like, there's a Cambridge Modern Jazz Society. So we went up to the table and said, yeah. And it's like, what do you play? Drums? What do you play? Saxophone? We've got a gig tonight. Can you do it? Yeah, sure. So we had literally the first day we got there, we got a gig with the Cambridge Modern Jazz Quartet, because they were like these second years that didn't have a drummer or a saxophone player, and they were waiting to see if anybody would show up. And we sort of showed up. So boom, we had a band, you know. And that was this guy, Tim Kelsey was the bass player, who is now a millionaire. He did something like he did this thing where he started this website where you rate your GP. You know, I can't remember what it's called, but you reviewed your GP, and he made loads of money, and he went to Australia, and he's not a musician anymore. And then the piano player was this guy called Tim Gowers, who's like one of the most famous mathematicians in the world. He got the Field Medal, which is like the Nobel Prize for maths. He was a postgrad. He was a really good piano player. And there was this kind of guy, Anthony, played guitar. And then we showed up and boom, we were suddenly in this band. And they were actually into a lot of really interesting music. So we hadn't heard a lot of people, a lot of musicians that they were into. So they sort of played us a lot more open-ended jazz and Ornette Coleman and Keith Jarrett and various things like that. And we all started composing for that band. So it was a really good experience. And we played a lot of gigs and played gigs in London, played gigs around. And then we'd come back to Scotland in the holidays, and the whole scene was still developing. But we would be bringing back, got to check out this record. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of women playing like at our age, and so like from what I remember at the Broughton Jazz School, I don't remember there being any female tutors, and I don't remember there being any female students. I mean, later on, if you sort of look at, I spent 2 or 3 years running NIJOS for a while with Laura McDonald, and then it would be like 14, 15 years old, it'd be like 50-50 split. But I think there was something about that sort of solitary male, slightly sad fucker, teenager that got into jazz and practiced and didn't have, we were all a bit like that. We kind of got into this thing somehow, and were a bit isolated, and we weren't part of a social group until we sort of met. So it wasn't like a sort of very social thing, and it wasn't part. At one point there was this Edinburgh School's big band I was in, and I think there were some girl players in that. And me and my brother were in a wind band at school, and there was a couple of girl players in that. Well, I really fancied Julia Marrett, who's the trumpet player, but nothing ever happened. Yeah, it was a very male scene for a long time. And my sister, who you met earlier, started singing jazz around the time. But there was quite a while when my brother and I were playing with my dad in the house and practicing and things like that for several years before. And then suddenly later on she said, I want to sing. So she kind of got into it a bit later. But yeah, it was a very male-dominated scene. Yeah, so I decided to take a year out from medicine and go to music college for a year. And I wasn't there. It still didn't feel like there was a huge range of choice, but my dad had met this guy in Montreal who ran a jazz course at McGill, and he was sort of friends with my dad. And I'd sort of written to a few other places, but this guy Kevin said, "Yeah, if you want to come and study here, that's cool." And my parents split up, so my dad's girlfriend lived there, so there was like a sort of connection in Montreal. So I didn't have a lot of other options, but I decided to do that and see what happened. For a foreign student, it was quite expensive, so I could only afford to do 2 classes a week. So I did composition and arranging, but I also got some drum lessons, and I was in some combos. So I kind of was busy, but I wasn't doing a lot of the. I didn't get any kind of qualification. I was just sort of there as a sort of. I don't know what the technical term would be, but I absolutely loved it, and I didn't know anything when I got there. And the composing and arranging courses were 4th-year courses, so you were meant to have done 3 years of harmony studies before you did them. I didn't know anything. Like literally, I'd written quite a few tunes, but I could read music and write music, but I didn't know anything about harmony at all. I did everything by ear. And so the first lesson, the teacher said, "Could you harmonically analyze this tune? I just want to check out how you're all doing it." It was some bebop tune. I had no fucking idea what I was doing. I could see people writing numbers on it, and I was like, "Ooh, better seemed to be writing Roman numerals on it. I don't know, I'm quite sure what that's about. So I just wrote some numerals on it randomly, and then I had to hand them in, and everyone, he looked at mine and kind of went, "Do you want to come and see me after?" And then he went, "Right, most of you seem to understand harmony." And he gave me a look, "But we're going to learn George Russell's Lydian chromatic concept of harmony, which is a completely different way of thinking about harmony." And that was the first thing I learned, which was kind of a bit nuts. And it was kind of cool. So after the lesson, he said, "Look, you're going to have to catch up because you are fucking nowhere." So I was like, okay. And I worked really hard. And then most of the other guys in the class were really busy doing dissertations and lots of other things, and they had exams on their instrument to pass and all that stuff. So while I was just doing that class and the arrangement class, so I was writing 2 or 3 compositions every week. And the teacher loved it because every time he gave an assignment, I would come back with 2 or 3 versions of it and really take it seriously and put a lot of effort into it. And I'd started a band as well. In fact, the first guy I met was Tom Line, who you interviewed this morning. He was the first person I spoke to when I walked in. And it was like, hello, I'm from Scotland. Oh, I play the bass, I play the drums, do you want to go and play? And we went, that was it. We sort of exchanged 3 or 4 words, and then we went off and had a jam. And he became one of them. So we had a band, me and Tom, and this wee chubby guy called Mike, who played guitar, and this black guy called Denzel, who played piano. He was a very beautiful, kind of tall guy. He became a really famous Canadian jazz singer called Denzel. He changed his name. His name at that time was Denzel Pinnock, so he changed it to something else. But he sounds like Nat King Cole. He was an incredibly gifted guy. He played piano, and I would write loads of tunes, and every week we'd play my tunes, and it was great. So, and every week there was a gig in the jazz club in Montreal, 2080 Jazz Club, and all the bands would play one or 2 tunes. So I had a great time. And I was there for about 8 or 9 months. And I did an interview about 3 years ago about education, jazz education. And I remember talking about that time, and I suddenly went, oh my God, that's when my life started. That's when this person started. So everything that I do now, I started doing then. I was really happy. You know, I was really comfortable. I was really happy. I knew I was good at composing. I knew that I was good at it. I knew I was doing something different. My drumming was getting better, and it was quite a conservative school, McGill, but I went really avant-garde and sort of conceptual, and as a kind of, but I could feel this sort of growing sense of I can do this. But it just didn't occur to me that this, it took another 3 or 4 years to really go, okay, this is who I am, which is kind of just the way I guess that happens. But it was like there was these massive, huge, big, shining letters going, this is what you should do, dude. This is it. Do this. You're really happy. You're good at it. You love it. You like the people, you know. But it was like, no, I've got to go back to Britain and do another 3 years of medicine. So.
And had your brother taken a year out, or was he?
Yeah, and he was based in Scotland, and he played in Hue and Cry, the pop band with Tommy and Colin Steele, and was making loads of money and playing big gigs and stuff like that, because they were quite big at that time. So he was, but he came over to Montreal for a week or 2 when I was there, and everyone thought he was great. I was like, fucking bastard. Your brother's amazing. So, yeah, I know. I'm really happy. So, but yeah, he came over, and so I had to go back to the UK, and I'd chosen to do my next 2 years in London. So, but around that time, you know, it was interesting because I remember so I was living in London in the term time and back in Scotland, as I'd done in Cambridge when I was at Cambridge. And at one point, I was at a jam session in the Glasgow Jazz Fest. And I think, actually, when I first got back from Montreal, Roger commission. I got my first commission as a composer in Scotland, and Roger kind of went, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I've been writing all this sextet music." I said, "Okay, you've got a gig." So he gave me a gig in the jazz festival. And I got a gig in the Glasgow Jazz Festival, and it was boom. I was one of the young composers on the jazz scene. And I think I didn't really understand it at the time, but I think the fact I'd gone away to study was cool. You know, I'd done something interesting, and I brought back I'd really developed as a musician in that time. So I came back with a whole set of tunes that were me, you know, that had my sort of personality. I think I'd like to fully acknowledge that I was very privileged and had a very, you know, as privileged an education as almost possible to have, and you know, financial security, all these other things. The thing that I would, but the thing that I would point out in contrast between me and my wife's family is that they came from sort of jazz royalty. So, and it's the same with, I know Clark Tracy well, whose dad was Stan Tracy, and I think the kids are really successful jazz musicians. They have this different kind of privilege, which is they just know they're good. They have this sort of, I'm sure they may well go, that's bullshit. You don't know what it's like, but from the outside, it looks like they just have this sort of stamp of approval, and they have all these connections, and they're inside the tent. Whereas, because we were coming from a very, you know, completely outside that, and also we didn't go to music college for like 3 or 4 years, like, you know, a lot of people did. There was all this nagging feeling that we weren't good enough, or we weren't the real thing, and that you were sort of fooling yourself. So I think most musicians deal with these question marks about whether they're good or not, and it's actually part of the creative process and part of the creative personality, and that you repeatedly have to go through these self-doubt kind of walls and barriers and get over them. And I've learned to love that, you know, as part of the thing, and welcome it and see it as part of the being a creative person. And you know, I remember seeing somebody. The guy that taught me drums at Wavendon when I was 14, 15, I remember him talking about, he was playing in a club where Elvin Jones was playing, and Elvin Jones, he's like one of my total heroes as a drummer. Every night he'd come off and go, "That was shit. I was shit tonight," you know. And you hear these stories of Sonny Rollins and people like that who've gone through real self-doubt. Now, I'm not in any way comparing myself to those guys. I'm just saying that even the absolute best in the world struggle with those question marks. So I don't think having a dad who's really famous is going to be that uncomplicatedly positive, because then you get accused of, you know, nepotism and all that crap as well. So, but all I'm saying is that there was this feeling of being an outsider in the jazz scene and jazz sort of, and having to prove yourself and all that kind of stuff. So I think that ultimately, I don't know how things would be different if I'd gone to music college and what the sort of thing the young guys do now. But I do think doing medicine and doing those things were really interesting and amazing experiences. And I don't think I would like to give them up. In my past, I think they sort of made me who I am up to a point. So I think it's so different now. I mean, there's this sort of YouTube thing. So you can go onto YouTube and see hours of Elvin Jones playing drums. You can see Elvin Jones teaching drums and talking about. It was impossible to get a hold of any of that stuff when we were kids. So it's possible to sort of teach yourself just about anything now from YouTube. Then there's all these really good courses just in the UK, in London and Birmingham and Glasgow, and where you can go and study to be a jazz musician. Doesn't mean that it's easy. I'm not saying it's easy at all, because the standard is really high, so people are better younger in the sort of that kind of college educated, and I think a lot of people are very homogenous. There's a sort of homogeneity around the output of these colleges, because a lot of them are quite similar, and it's a lot of middle class kids who, you know, go there and have similar experiences, come out sounding quite similar. So I think to really be different is hard now, but there's certainly a lot more options, and there's not any more gigs. There's probably less gigs, in fact. So I worry for that generation that they're going to just find it hard to make a living, and especially if there's loads of really good players coming out. Yeah, I don't think the scene is healthier now. In infrastructure is it's almost worse because there's been a sort of accumulation of missed opportunities over the last 30 years, or failed attempts to develop the infrastructure in Scotland, which kind of brings with it this sort of lack of optimism around about organising in the scene. So there's quite a lot of things that are. I mean, when we were like 20, 21, 22, 23, there was a real feeling of excitement around the Scottish jazz scene. And I think there's a bit of that just now with like Fergus McCready and Graham Costello and these guys, and there's a sort of another generation that are like that are getting some attention from outside Scotland. But and that's great, and it's really cool. I'm excited for them that might, hopefully that will translate. But there still isn't that sort of healthy infrastructure to give those young guys careers, you know. And I think it's been tough for us to make careers and make them work.
And finally, I mean, to an outsider, you know, there's an awful lot of jazz musicians in Path Head. You know, there's a lot of them living together. There's a lot living across the road, and there's lots of siblings living together. I mean, presumably that's through choice, but it's quite a tight-knit community of musicians. How does that all work? I mean, you never get away from each other then.
It's very relaxed. I mean, we don't see each other every week, and it's kind of inspiring that there's all these guys around you that are working and doing things, and so we all do our own thing, and we occasionally do things together. But and if you want someone to give you feedback on things, you just say, "Do you want to?" All that sort of stuff's really cool. And if you want to borrow stuff, and you can go for a walk with somebody and just tell them how. But we're not really living in each other's pockets, and it's very relaxed. It's lovely. I love it. What happened to me is that a few years after where we got up to, I had a couple of commissions to write for a big band. Again, the first one was Roger Spence, I think. And then I got a UK tour with it, which I can't remember exactly, but there's a Radio 3 broadcast. The whole gig was broadcast on Radio 3, and it had some funding, and it felt like things were really progressing. But it took a couple of years to get that together, and we played in London and Belfast, and I wrote a whole new set of music for it, and I think it was just when I was finishing. It was actually when I took a bit of time out from my last bit of medical training. I took 6 months out and did that tour, and I sort of thought, this is it. This is going to be the sort of breakthrough, and then sort of nothing happened after that. It was kind of like, oh shit, I've got to do that all again. I thought I'd start getting loads of work and things would sort of start to really bubble under. It was like, no, I've got to, and I realised that I had to make CDs and release to kind of get anywhere, and that kind of applied to everybody. So then I ended up, with some encouragement from Matt Rook at the Scottish Arts Council, I ended up getting a lottery funding to start a record label. About 100 at the time. It was 100 grand, but at the time that was a lot of money for like 3 years. And I would have been. It was just after my son was born, so I would have been 30. So suddenly I was sort of in the infrastructure game and having to learn a whole bunch of new skills. And yeah, it was pretty hard work. It was pretty heavy going. So like, we released about 40 albums over 7 years, and a lot of them were really good, and got a lot of good reviews and really put Scottish jazz on the map. And having said that, but I ended up feeling like everybody hated me, and a lot of the relationships with musicians became very difficult, and there was a lot of resentment, and things got really complicated emotionally with my peer group. I thought they were all going to be really excited and happy about stuff, but it just got really complicated. I didn't handle it as well as I could have done, I don't think. But we got a lot of stuff done, but I just couldn't understand the resentment and the emotional complexity of it, and how people were very ambivalent about my role. And it wasn't until I met this this woman at the Lighthouse, which was a sort of place in Glasgow, and she had been doing a PhD on anarchist politics and art galleries. And I thought, that has got nothing to do with me at all. And then she explained that there's this whole history of political organisation and trade unions and various different, where marginalised groups organise and form some kind of political structure, and the people that represent the group become a source of resentment, and the marginalised group feels almost more marginalised because they've got some leadership who are apparently getting power and some status. So rather than feeling represented and empowered by that, the people in the marginalised group just feel more marginalised because there's another layer of, and it completely explained what happened with Cable Music, which was the record label and the artists. And I said, well, fuck, of course that's going to happen. So if we're all sort of struggling away trying to make a career, and then somebody starts a structure to sort of represent it, but they get a lot of decision-making power and status and stuff, and then everyone's going to, of course, they're going to resent that person. And it was like, boom, okay. And then subsequent to that, I've seen that happen to a lot of other people who have tried to take organisation roles, both in Scotland and other places in the jazz scene. And I always try and talk to them about it and share that experience of the anarchist politics ladies' theories about it, because I think it's helpful to understand that it's not you, it's structural, it's almost inevitable, that if a musician takes that role, the other musicians are not going to be uncomplicatedly happy about it. So there was a point where the biggest problem was that the Arts Council couldn't fund the record label directly for a whole bunch of reasons to do with their policy. They just didn't fund record labels directly. So it kind of ran out of steam after about 3 or 4 years. And we did a lot of stuff, and a lot of things happened, but and a lot of artists got albums released that hadn't had anything done before that, and some of them haven't done anything since, or hardly. But when it fell apart, my life was fucked. So I was I split up with my wife. Everybody felt like everyone hated me. The company sort of ran out of money, and it was kind of like I'm in a big hole I've got to get out of. Personally, I didn't feel like I was really playing well, and I felt like people didn't feel like I justified stuff, and I felt a bit paranoid about where I was. So I kind of had to sort of just work my way out of that and just get back to playing my own stuff. And
you're not tempted just to go, the hell with it, I'll go back to being a doctor?
No. And actually, I sort of kind of tried various different things, and but there was a point where I just started practicing and really committing to the instrument, and that's what made me happy and sort of helped me to get back on an even keel. And then actually, coming here and being part of this collective and doing things in a more collective way sort of was part of the reaction to that experience with the record label. So I'm in this group called Playtime, which is a collective, and I'm in PMC, which is a collective, and I feel much more comfortable. I still do my own projects where I'm the band leader, but anything that's more infrastructural, I feel much more comfortable being part of a collective now, than because of that experience of how that went before. It doesn't mean things go the way you necessarily want, but you're part of a decision-making process, a shared process, and and it's better, you know. Well, I felt like a sort of things healed, you know, and I fell in love with playing the drums again, and really love playing music. I still feel really privileged to still be doing it, and yeah. So I'm kind of I'm a bit battered and bruised, but at the same time, I'm still standing and still enjoying it and still going. I don't know if you ever come across there's a book called Falling Upwards, and it's by this priest. I can't remember his name, but the central premise of this book is that a lot of people's lives happen in two halves, and the first half is all about success and status and kind of striving to achieve, and the second half is more about connection and connectedness and contentment, and for quite a lot of people the dividing moment is a moment of failure, and sort of, and the idea is that you, instead of falling over or fall down, you actually, it's because you fail that you grow and that you sort of change. And I think that definitely happened to me. So I was sort of I was very overconfident. I was taking on too much. I sort of, I got really fucked by being a public school twat, you know, by thinking I could do everything, and ended up letting a lot of people down and over not being enough risk aware and how things could go wrong. And I really got bitten in the arse by that on lots of levels, both professionally and financially and personally. But I think that process of things collapsing and sort of failing was ultimately a really good thing for me as a person, and kind of climbing out of that hole, which took quite a long time, but it was, you know, it was different. So, and part of that process was things sort of healing in my family. We had 2 young kids, and there was lots of reasons for us to sort of work things out, and we did eventually. And I think also as a musician, as a creative person, it's a really tough life, and it breaks people. You can see people breaking themselves on the sort of trying to make it as a musician, but sometimes when they fail, they sort of come out actually stronger somehow, because they sort of evolve. It's like a little bit like Gandalf falling down the hole, and he comes out as a sort of more powerful wizard, because he's lost a lot of fear, because the worst thing that could possibly happen has happened. So I think as a musician and as an artist and as a creative person, that whole kind of, it was a bit of a disaster in some respects, but it was important, you know, to kind of go through that as a person, and so now I feel stronger because of it, you know, and I'm really glad that I recovered things with Gina and my kids and everything. So we came out of it sort of healed at the end of it. But I think it is a really tough life, choosing to be a jazz musician. We're kind of compelled to do it somehow. There's all these really smart people that, you know, you go, why are you putting yourself through this? What the fuck? You know, you could have made loads of money doing just about anything else, and you sort of, but we all do it because we're compelled to do it, and it's something deeply validating about it. And then since in the last 4 or 5 years, 6, 7 years, with playtime and the various things I'm doing, I feel very creatively fulfilled by it. So, and some of that's intrinsic to being in Scotland and the mixture of scenes here, and being a path head and all these different things. So, yeah, it's just that's the way it went for me. You know, it kind of, there was a big crash, and I really tried to do way too much. I was good intentions, you know, and then I've sort of been much more measured since then, and focused on what was important for me, and it's been better.